Good evening to the Pacific, good afternoon to Asia, and good morning to Africa and Europe. Very warm welcome to the ADBI Featured Speaker Webinar. Today, we are delighted to have Indonesia Finance Minister, Dr. Sri Mulyani Indrawati with us. Her Excellency will explain Indonesia's G20 host strategy to bolster inclusive and resilient post-COVID-19 recovery and sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific and globally. The keynote speech will be followed by a discussion. As panelists, I will invite some colleagues of mine at ADBI and also my good friend, Dr. Febrio Nathan Kakaribu, Chairman of Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance, Indonesia. After this panel discussion, we will open the floor for questions. Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati had served as Indonesia's finance minister since 2016. She held the same position from 2005 to 2010, and then served as a managing director of the World Bank Group until 2016. She earned her Ph.D. in economics from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'm extremely grateful to Minister for making great efforts to find time to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further delay, please welcome our featured speaker, Minister Sri Mulyani. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dean Sonobe-san. Distinguished ADB expert, the webinar participant, good afternoon to all of you in our region on the other part of the world with a different time zone. I would like first to convey my highest appreciation to Mr. Tetsushi Sonobe and all the ADBI team for arranging this timely discussion on a very important topic. Our discussion today will demonstrate why Indonesia's role as incoming G20 president is strategically important for the global economy and for the citizens of the world. It's been now almost 2 years. We have seen massive and unprecedented impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, both on the health as well as social and economy globally, which led the economic recession or contraction in almost all countries in the world without exception. The current global crisis brought by the pandemic has served a wake-up call to improve our global economic resilience and also to be able to prepare better for any future pandemic, because the cause of this pandemic is really, really material. Despite currently we see positive growth in many parts of the world in the last quarter, or in this case, the second quarter of this year, the global economy recovery is uneven. And it is also remains subject to downside risk, which is also growing and significant. A potential global slowdown and rising inflation due to supply shock, as well as future global risks that we must continue have to manage and observe carefully. The vaccination, which is also unequal across country, can provide or can reduce exacerbation on this risk of uneven recovery. We also see now complication as a policymaker to see the increasing inflation while the recovery is not yet strong or in this case stable. So there is a term now, stagflation, which is currently mentioned by some part of experts. This definitely will complicate the policy choice for all countries. How we are going to, on the one hand, continue support the recovery of the economy. On the other hand, we have to make sure that the increasing inflation or price will not create a pressure further for the economy that can weaken the purchasing power and then weaken the recovery of the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, for Indonesia, our response to the COVID is also reflected in our fiscal policy and working closely with our monetary authority. Because this crisis is different from what we saw in the ASEAN financial crisis or banking crisis back in 97-98 and global financial crisis. We use our fiscal policy as a counter-cyclical as well as providing stability to the economy. We work together with the monetary authority in order for us to be able to create an effective and powerful counter-cyclical without creating unnecessary risk for our own macroeconomic framework in the medium and long term. And we work together with central bank and financial sector authority and deposit insurance authority to make sure that stability of financial system will continue to be maintained or even strengthened during this very challenging time. We use fiscal policy in order to support the intervention, especially on the health, providing social protection, and supporting small medium enterprises as well as corporations. So they are not only just resilient or can survive during this difficult time, but they will be also able to recover stronger. Thankfully, at this very moment, significant improvement in the Indonesia effort to limit and control the pandemic has shown a very encouraging result. This is despite the Delta variant, which is creating a devastating impact for all countries in the world. Currently, we are all witnessing a surge or increasing significantly number of cases in some countries, especially in Europe and United States, or even in China. Indonesia, the case is now declined to less than 400 new cases daily. We also learned from our previous year, close to the Christmas and New Year holiday, we have to keep very vigilant. So cabinet as well as local government, we are all now still continue, even though the case is declining at a very low level, we still continue and remain very vigilant with the pandemic COVID. Because as we can see, pandemic COVID continued to become a significant risk for the economy to recover. At the same time, government also committed to accelerate vaccination to achieve 208 million by the end of the year. Our daily vaccination has increased to above 2 million doses per day. This is really a humongous task, which we mobilize all institutions and instruments, local government, police, or even military to do the operation at the very critical level to increase the ability to vaccinate our population. So despite we have this variant Delta, which devastated and creating a weakening economy on the third quarter, we can still see and maintain positive growth in all components of our demand side, albeit with a much lower level like consumption and investment. But we are fortunate to see the export, both commodity and non-commodity, are driven or increased significantly during this very critical time. So this is going to be one of the most important and critical tasks, how we are going to maintain the momentum using our fiscal tools in a very wisely and accountable, effective way, and combining our monetary policy and fiscal policy with financial regulation in order to be able to not only withstand the shock, but to recover the economy stronger. Now, within this recovery theme, Indonesia, which is going to be the host as well as the presidents for the G20, is going to use this event to address a critically global strategic issue for not only G20 member country, but for the world. We all know that the G20 role is very critical post the 1998 ASEAN financial crisis in order to strengthen especially financial sector, and then also during the global financial crisis 2008, which then resulted into a policy to strengthen financial system. Pandemic has totally different costs as well as effect for the economy. The cost is health threat. The implication is much wider and deeper to our society. And that's why within this G20 presidency, Indonesia will continue focusing on how we are going to be able to support the recovery, which is still very challenging. G20 during the previous host by Italy, or even before that during Saudi presidency, has delivered support for vulnerable economies. For example, on the debt restructuring and the SDR allocation, mobilizing vaccination and supporting therapeutic. Secondly, elevating the importance of sustainable finance through the G20 Sustainable Finance Roadmap. The third, identifying gaps in the global health system with the work to better finance the global common for pandemic preparedness and response. The fourth, G20 is also able to accelerating the global agreement on digital taxation, which ensure a more stable and fairer international tax system. And then the last one, G20 has been also able to work to facilitate more infrastructure investment to close a large financing gap in the infrastructure development. Dear colleague and participant, on our presidency G20, which we are still continue facing pandemic and their economic impact, which is significant, we are going to use this meeting to call our global commitment to work together hand in hand toward a strong, sustainable, inclusive, balanced, and resilient growth. G20 leadership has demonstrated the global effort to accelerate the global economic and financial recovery, and it is also crucial for us to ensure a safe exit for all and embark on a path toward sustainable future. With this consideration in place, Indonesia G20 presidency has chosen the theme, Recover Together, Recover Stronger. The theme reflected our intention as well as objective to strengthen coordination and collaboration in economic and financial policy in order to create no country and no one left behind on the path of recovery. The theme also reflected the importance of promoting productivity, resilience, and stability, ensuring sustainable and inclusive growth. The effort will be supported by strong collective global leadership and enabling environment and partnership. On the finance track, During the Indonesia presidency, we will focus on 6 flagship areas. First, exit strategy to support recovery. Second, addressing scoring effect to secure future growth. Third, payment system in the digital era. Fourth, sustainable finance. Fifth, financial inclusion. And sixth, international taxation. These 6 areas will be key to ensure an accelerated, global, inclusive, and safe recovery, and set the world on path to a more sustainable future. For our first Finance Minister and Central Bank Governor meeting that will be held this next February 2022, and then it will be followed by subsequent meeting in April, July, and October. We also put additional agenda of the important health issue, which is during the Japan presidency, this is becoming one of the already very important agenda. So we will continue addressing those issues. We will also conduct the G20 Joint Finance and Health Minister meeting, which is already have the president during Japanese presidency. We believe this is going to be important to develop a clear and informative communication strategy for domestic and international community in terms of what is the priority for the G20 to be discussed and what is the challenge for the global economy in securing a recovery in an inclusive and equitable way, so that we are going to be able to use this G20 meeting as a place for the communication, coordination, and collaboration. We also, in this case, building better public understand and support the success of G20 based on our own experience when we hosted the IMF World Bank annual meeting. We also see that the Indonesia presidency is an important milestone, the beginning of the G20 hosting by all emerging countries. After Indonesia, it will be hosted by India, Brazil, and South Africa. So 4 countries in a row, which mainly the country as an emerging country, and also we do hope it will provide a strong platform voice for developing country and emerging country to be able to shape global policy. Indonesia is the biggest country in the Southeast Asia. So we do hope also G20 as a place for our colleague ASEAN country, Southeast Asia, to be also feel represented in this forum. The region now, especially in Asia, have a very unique situation. On the one hand, COVID definitely affecting our economy and the region. And we also see the consequences of the COVID for especially the student or the children, which they are all affected by non-attending to the school due to the COVID, that then have the implication on their study and academic achievement as well as social skill. Indonesia will use our G20 presidency to also showcase our national reform agenda. The crisis like COVID is being treated as an important opportunity for us to push our reform stronger, deeper, and more effective. We have already reformed our investment climate policy and regulation by simplifying and debureaucratize so that we are going to be able to create a strong, better investment environment through omnibus law job creation. We just actually months ago passing another milestone of reform which is critical, that is on a taxation, harmonizing taxation law, including introducing carbon tax and carbon market. This is a very critical and important role. We are not wasting this crisis, but we push even further the reform in order for us to be able then not only recover, but recover stronger and better. We also has initiated with ADB a mechanism to create a better, greener energy by launching energy transition mechanism. This is a concrete action by Indonesia, supported by ADB, in order for us to be able to address the issue of coal-based energy, which we know they have a very high emission on carbon dioxide, but they're also very important to provide baseline energy for any economy. So we will continue addressing this issue in a very careful and effective way. And we will also using the global taxation in order for us to be able to strengthen our tax domestic resource mobilization. The practice of avoiding base erosion and profit shifting is going to be very critical. Currently, we are still discussing with the Parliament on how we can formulate a better government transfer to the local government and revenue sharing. This is going to be very critical to improve the spending side of our budget. So these are all the list of reform that Indonesia has been and continue doing even during this very overwhelming and challenging COVID pandemic time. We are not wasting this crisis. We use it as creating a stronger determination to reform our economy. On an international taxation, with the historic agreement which is reached by the G20 and OECD to create a more stable, fair international taxation system in which the G20 and all other countries agree on two pillars on the reallocation of profit of multinational enterprises and effective global minimum tax rate. This is one of the very important milestones on the global taxation regime by creating a multilateralism in addressing the issue of avoiding tax in any jurisdiction and addressing the very difficult, challenging taxation on a digital economy. This will create a solid starting point to formulate the way forward, and Indonesia will continue addressing and putting this agenda as the most important one on the implementation of global taxation agreement. On the health, we are going to continue support the effort for the global community to be able to prepare for the next pandemic. G20 Finance Minister and Health Ministers has a meeting in 29th October 2021, which showing our affirmation or commitment to control the pandemic as early as possible, because we are all witnessing how devastated the consequence of this pandemic, not only on the health side, but on the economy and social side. How costly this pandemic to all of us. So the world should be able to better prepare for any pandemic in the near future. The G20 has committed, among other the cooperation on a vaccination, in which the milestone of achieving 40% of vaccination by the end of the year and 70% by mid-2022 is going to be one of the most important commitments that still need to be continued delivered. Financing for the pandemic preparedness is going to be very critical. That's why the discussion is not only on a health aspect, but most importantly on the financing side. That's why the meeting joined between Health and Finance Minister is become one of the most important vehicle to address this issue in a more comprehensive way. I'm going to also address the issue of another challenge and threat for the global economy, that is climate change. We recognize that this is very critical for all of us to avoid the warming of this earth, and this will require a credible program for reduction CO2 emission. Indonesia is already have our national determined contribution, but this cannot be achieved alone. We need support from the global community, whether in the form of financing and technology and know-how. Indonesia is doing our own homework, as I mentioned earlier, introducing carbon tax, introducing carbon market, as well as maintaining our forests in order for us to be able to deliver our commitment. To reach a target of net zero carbon emission around mid-century is going to be very challenging as committed by the G20. So we have to be able to design the path in a credible way to achieve those commitments. The agreement to stop funding of new dirty coal plants abroad by the end of 2021 is very critical. But we also have to be able to address the consequences, including the risk on the energy supply, which need to be continuous, stable, and affordable. And the commitment of advanced country to provide $100 billion for developing and emerging countries for climate adaptation costs has not been delivered. This is all the very important building block for all of us as a global community to be able to address the issue of climate change globally. The role of private sector definitely is very critical, but they are not going to just immediately participating in this climate change. So we need to design regulation, policy, or even creating incentive for private sector to be able to also addressing the issue of climate change. These are all the effort that Indonesia is doing as a country, but as a member of global community as well as the president of G20, we will use this platform in order for us to be able to collaborate and working together, because just like pandemic, climate change cannot be addressed by even any country, even though they are the largest. Global cooperation and coordination is a must. Within that context, I'm going to continue invite you all, including this ADBI, in order to become one of the institution or stakeholder in order to us to articulating the important need of global cooperation. I would like to extend the highest gratitude to ADB Institute for its continuous support to the region as well as to Indonesia, and also to support Indonesia in our G20 presidency. I'm sure with the ADBI active involvement, the development of new evidence-based policy and helping many member countries to address the challenge, especially due to the COVID as well as another very equally great challenge like climate change, we will be able to support all member countries to continue formulating a sound and good policy and cooperation among countries so that we are going to be able to address the critically important issue globally. Again, we believe that the agenda setting for 2022, which is not only focused on climate, on a COVID, but also on a climate and other very important issue, will be very critical for the world to be able to recover better and recover stronger, recover together. Thank you so much, and I do hope that you are going to have a very productive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for the concise and comprehensive and insightful keynote address. You explained what key policy issues are, what progresses have been made recently, including international tax cooperation, energy transition mechanism, and so on, and the importance of global coordination and cooperation. I'm sure that G20 Indonesia presidency will definitely facilitate global policy coordination and cooperation in important policy areas. My question is whether global policy coordination and cooperation are now becoming easier or more difficult than before? And if becoming more difficult, how will you cope with the difficulty in coordinating and cooperating? Minister, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean. I'm sorry. First, I think we are all recognized that the issue and the situation is much more complex if you compare with the G20 meeting post the global financial crisis. In 2008, 2009, global financial crisis posed a common threat and one direction of threat for all countries. That is financial stability, as well as, in this case, the threat on a contraction of the economy. So in 2008, 2009, you can see that whether this is advanced, emerging country, they are all in one synchronized policy direction. And that's why coordination is becoming much easier. We recognize that we need to do the counter-cyclical and at the same time also have to stabilize and reform financial sector. COVID, on the other hand, after 1.5 years, we see some countries recover very strongly, and then they suffer with a higher inflation. And COVID creating supply disruption, which is much deeper and much more complex than what originally expected or thinking. For example, like the labor shortage, transportation, and also some of the shortage on the raw material due to the transportation, even at the very simple, for example, the export which is disrupted by the availability of the container, which is not evenly distributed. So these are all become an issue which complicate the effort by all countries to recover. Now, because of the vaccination, which is not even, and complication of the supply chains, and then hit by another commodity price because of the high demand, especially from the advanced country, which is already recovered, then country will face with a complication. For the imported income country, for commodity like oil, gas, coal, they are going to have an increasing pressure on a supply cost supply, which eventually is going to increase the inflation. So are we going to have a one synchronized? This is something which is very critical. So it is very, very challenging. How we are going to address this issue? I think first, communication is very important. Learning from 2008, 2009, and then at that time when the United States started to do the tapering, communication is very critical. As of now, at least the United States has communicated very clearly about their plan to taper. But it doesn't mean that the risk of tapering is going to be then eliminated. It at least creating a much more predictable market reaction, but it doesn't mean that the consequence is going to be like gone. So we will still continue to face with the complexity of this recovering the economy, addressing the issue of inflation, which is for many emerging countries will be translated into capital outflow, exchange rate pressure. Then it's going to have another pressure for the recovery of the economy, which is still at a very fragile and early stage. The second one, after communication and try to discuss more based on the evidence and data, there is what we call it multilateral institution, which is designed to do exactly this job, that is coordination and collaboration. For example, like IMF, which is going to be very critical in synchronizing the policy, addressing the issue of future risk. So the discussion as well as how we are going to be able to cooperate is going to be very critical. World Bank, ADB, AIIB, and other institutions, which is we expect to play a very important multilateral institution who can coordinate and addressing the issue and addressing the weaknesses or in this case capacity, especially in developing and emerging countries, to continue, navigate, and manage this recovery. I think these are all the issues that we could work together. G20 as a platform, as a group, which is in terms of the number is relatively less, but their role in the global economy is very, very significant, will become additional feature or forum to continue providing this communication and collaboration so that we will be able to lessen the trade-off as well as the complication or asynchronous policy among countries within G20 as well as with the non-member countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I completely agree with you. Now, I'd like to invite some of my colleagues. First, Nera Hendrietti, ADBI Senior Capacity Building and Training Economist. Nera, I think you have a question about the infrastructure.
Yes. Thank you, Dean Sonobe. Selamat sore, Ibu Menteri and Pak Febrio. My question, like Dean Sonobe mentioned, that's about quality infrastructure investment. So, and with this Indonesia presidency of G20 2022 and ASEAN Chair 2023, and we also learned from this COVID-19 pandemic that social infrastructure together with digital and green infrastructure also become more important. And then, but we also know that, you know, we need people who know how to use the infrastructure, manage infrastructure, to be skilled and educated. So, is there any like a policy in this G20 or ASEAN agenda that recouple human and economic development, Ibu Menteri? Thank you very much.
Well, infrastructure is very critical before COVID, and this is going to be even more important for this COVID, especially when you are also talking about the digital infrastructure. The ability to vaccinate all the population will definitely require mobility, and that will require infrastructure, both hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure, social infrastructure, if you call it, education and health. So within the context of how we are going to address the COVID, how we are going to design a better quality and sustainable infrastructure is going to be very critical. This is exactly what we are now trying to address both in Indonesia and I think within the context of G20. Within the G20, the focus may be more on hard infrastructure financing, especially inviting private sector to the de-risking ability to create what we call it asset class. But within this pandemic, we also see that now addressing the issue of soft infrastructure like social infrastructure, education, and health, and how digital economy play an important role within that context. We know that during this pandemic, our children cannot attend school physically, but they have to continue learn. So we need infrastructure on IT communication that is enabling all students, regardless their income level, to be able to have the access of internet and having the access to digitally learn with their school. And that's why in Indonesia, we invest significantly within our budget digital infrastructure, as well as providing a subsidy or freeing the internet for students and teachers so that they are going to be able to continue learning even though through the digital and internet infrastructure or communication. The same thing also for the health. We know that when people get COVID, they are very alarmed and they just go to the hospital, and that can create an overwhelming services for the hospital or health center. So we continue also building digital services on the health, in which the doctor can provide Q&A for people so that they are going to be able to get what is the right information, not only rely on news, but also from the very authoritative source, so that we will be able to manage the pressure, especially on a hospital. This is especially important when we are facing like Delta variant, which the increasing cases can happen in a very short time. Within 2 weeks, the number of cases can increase from 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, and then suddenly to at the level of 50,000. That definitely will overwhelm the health services. So IT will become one of at least contributing to lessening the pressure. So these are all what I call it a very important hard and soft infrastructure, social infrastructure that now becoming very critical. The question is how you are going to be able to build. So policy is good, is also critical. Regulation is also very important, and financing, especially private sector participation, should be done in a transparent and good governed way, so that we are going to be able to get the financing which is sustainable and good quality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Dr. Daniel Siradarma, Research Fellow at ADBI, will ask you about the fiscal support exit strategy. Daniel?
Thank you, Dean Sonobe. Minister Sri Mulyani, I want to ask you about pandemic-related fiscal support provided to the private sector. How soon should the government start withdrawing it, and what would be the best strategy to do so? Thank you.
Well, this is related to maybe at the headline aggregate level as well as on a very specific detail level. So if we talk about the headline aggregate level, the question is actually how big is the fiscal deficit as your counter-cyclical power to stabilize and recover the economy. Indonesia, for example, for the first time have to eliminate the deficit cap of 3% of GDP within our fiscal. This is because during pandemic, the revenue dropped by more than 16%, spending increased quite significantly. So we actually, for 3 years, 2020 until 2022, allowing Indonesia to have deficit more than 3%. But the headline number, in this case, Indonesia in 2021, we have the deficit designed originally only 5.7%, increased to 6.3%, end up with 6.1% of GDP. This is relatively modest if you compare with many other countries who do the very powerful counter-cyclical. That's why our country has also suffered increasing public debt, because the deficit means it is translated into increasing debt. So Indonesia is very careful in using our fiscal power or fiscal tool. This year, we are designing our deficit at 5.7%, but due to the revenue, which is very strong, either from the commodity price, export, but also from the recovery of the economy, we will hopefully can end up with a deficit which is much lower at the level of 5.2 to 5.4. We will see until this December or the end of our fiscal year. Next year, we also designed by 4.8%. We maybe end up with a much little lower. So by 2023, if Indonesia going to be able to continue consolidate the fiscal without weakening the recovery of economy, we will be able to return to the below 3% level of GDP deficit. This is important for the credibility of our macro-prudential policy. As an emerging country, we all know that we need to find the right balance between using fiscal policy as a counter-cyclical and also the stability of the macroeconomic and credibility of our policy framework. On the support on the economy, so it is not only headline, the question is, if you have deficit, how you are going to use the deficit? So for Indonesia, we focusing on the health, we protecting the most vulnerable household through the social protection, which is expanded. We also support small, medium enterprises. For large corporation, we mostly support them through the incentive in the fiscal, that is providing them with what we call it some tax break during this very difficult time. But now when the business is starting to recover, I think they also start to pay their tax properly.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Dina Azkarieva, Research Fellow, ADBI, ask green Islamic bonds.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. Minister Sri Mulyani, thank you very much for highlighting importance of financing national determined contributions for climate change mitigations. I know that Indonesia is a world leader issuer of green Islamic bonds, which is green sukuk. So any plans for using these instruments for your national determined contributions?
The NDC definitely require a support on the budget, but that's not the only source. Within the budget, we also use many instruments, whether this is on a tax incentive, spending, as well as the financing, including the green bonds as one of the instruments for us to be able to address the issue of climate change, especially in delivering our NDC. As I mentioned earlier, our NDC for 29% reduction will require almost 270 billion US dollar, which is not all of them are currently prepared, not only with our budget, but even with the private sector participation. So global participation is going to be very critical. In that case, we are not only using like green bonds, which since 2018 until now, we've already issued around 3.5 billion US dollar. But as I also mentioned in many occasions, unfortunately, this green bond is not providing a yield which is much more better and more competitive. So they are just treated just like conventional bonds. This is one of the most important challenges if globally, global carbon market as well as global instrument is going to address the issue climate change in a very serious and effective way. So these are going to be one of the issues that we are going to continue. For Indonesia, we will diversify our instrument, including building what we call it blended finance. We have our special mission vehicle like PTSMI, which they are providing a blended finance, because we saw, for example, like philanthropic fund, which is also one to address the issue of climate change, combined with the private sector, combined with multilateral institution fund and our own budget, they can work together to have a much better and stronger impact.
Thank you. So very quickly, Dr. Peter Monga, Vice Chair of Research, ADBI.
Thanks very much, Sri Mulyani. for your very comprehensive and clear presentation. My question relates both to issues of COVID-19 fiscal policy and financial inclusion. How do you assess the effectiveness of the COVID-19 response program of direct transfers to households, and what lessons did you learn from it?
Well, this is one of the most maybe effective in lessening the negative implication of COVID. We all know the difference between the financial crisis 2008-2009 or even ASEAN financial crisis. The COVID hit people directly. They cannot work. They cannot do the activities. So many informal sector, small, medium enterprises, they hit very hard. So for Indonesia, we cannot wait and using this fiscal without doing the fiscal transfer. So fortunately for us, we already have the list of household, which is already within what we call it the targeted subsidy. So we use this targeted subsidy household, which is vulnerable, to get additional fiscal transfer or government support. We are not like in many advanced countries, maybe you have, for example, other countries maybe have like the wage subsidy, but we try to do that one also. So on this social transfer for the most vulnerable, we expand it in two ways. That is, amount of beneficiaries been increased and the number of recipients also expanded. So from 18 million up to 28 million, and then we add to the village level additional 8 million. That is created what we call it expanded, what we call it government transfer. And we also provide what we call it for the small salary earner additional subsidy. We also combine with the electricity subsidy and internet subsidy. These are all becoming very powerful in supporting especially the most vulnerable household. The result from the study which is conducted, we also survey continuously this effectiveness. I think showing that if we didn't do that, the number of poverty will jump to more than 13% or even close to 14% from currently before COVID, which is around 9%. So we are now end up with poverty which is close to slightly above 10 and now declining again. So meaning that this kind of transfer have the ability to prevent severe jump of the poverty and unemployment. Many survey has been done on this, and I think we are very, very aware that this is one of the most important instruments for the government. But in close, I'm going to say that targeting is very important, updating the data is very important, and also in this case, using the, again, digital technology is going to be very critical. Dean, I have to really catch up the flight. If not, then I'm going to like miss my flight. Yes. So can I finish with this one? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Minister. Out of a very busy schedule, we learned a lot, and then we will really look forward to the G20 Indonesia. So all the best.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much.
With that, I'd like to conclude this featured speaker webinar. Thank you very much for the great participation, and please participate more in the next opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonobe-san. Thank you, Nella.
Thank you, Pak Febrio.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For the Q&A, we maybe address that later by writing. Sorry, I have
and for attendees and for panelists, if you are still staying, actually, Dr. Kakarib kindly agreed to stay on for a little bit. So please let me just continue a little bit over a session, including our research fellow, John, and also maybe one or two questions from the floor.
Great.
So, Dean, would it be okay if I take over the session from here?
Yes, yes. Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Febrio.
Thank you, my pleasure. Let's do that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kakarib.
John, yeah, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so my question relates to the finance track and specifically on the digitalization of financial services and payment systems, which has increased rapidly over the past decade in Asia and even more so during the pandemic. And clearly this shift towards financial digitalization offers substantial efficiency gains, as well as potentially strong financial inclusion outcomes. So the question is, what policy areas need to be focused on to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks associated with this? And in addition to that, what role can the G20 play?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish my fellow central banker from Bank of Indonesia would have been here to address that. But I can, if you don't mind, I can shed some light into the issues. We are, especially in the developing economies, we are looking at very positive impact of digitalization on financial inclusion. I think this has been a positive phenomenon wherever you go, to India, to Bangladesh, to Indonesia, especially in the region of Southeast Asia. We see that increasingly digitalization has helped the consumers, has helped the e-commerce and digital economy overall. And especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, several developing economies that I know has been utilizing and make use of this digitalization a lot and leveraging it to a higher level much faster than initially thought. Indonesia, for example, we are using the digitalization to transfer the money directly to many of these people who didn't really have bank accounts. And at the same time, we're also increasing the ownership of bank account as a result of the program that we're developing with building the database as well. So increasingly, not only that the unit cost of delivering the service of digitalization to the lower income families is actually much more promising now. We are also looking at this a big potential for the global economy to really leverage the technology, the IT, and also digitalization itself in general, for us to be able to not only delivering higher economic growth regionally or especially in the developing economies, but also how to connect the economies globally. So for example, the central bank in our G20, when they're talking about the working group, they are also going to be discussing about the emergence of the central bank digital currency. And they are going to be talking about how to mainstream the idea among the central banks globally. And of course, clearly, in terms of the safety, in terms of the security, there's always an issue, be it domestically, and of course, increasingly when it is trying to be leveraged to be cross-border. So there will be a lot of discussion about that in our G20 presidency as to how to leverage this digitalization, especially when we're talking about the payment system, and how to make the cross-border transactions are going to be more digitalized and more efficient in the future.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Kakaribu, do you think you might have time for maybe 2 questions before we completely conclude the session? Thank you so much.
Sure, I don't mind. My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kakaribu. So please let me start from the question posed by Professor Caitlin Brown, Director, Griffith Asia Institute. She asked about COVID. So she asked, we know that COVID-19 has disproportionately and negatively impacted on women's economic status over the past 2 years, especially in this region. What do you see as the priority issues for women's economic security through the post-pandemic period? And how will Indonesia ensure women's voices and economic interests are advanced through the 2022 hosting years?
Thank you. Again, that question is probably more appropriate to be directed to people who are going to be talking about that in the SERPA track. Minister of Finance, clearly with the central bank, are taking care of the finance track. But not to mention that we are also looking at some issues regarding the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 crisis on women, especially because women are in many parts of the world are taking care of families and children. So especially in the finance track, we are looking at the discussion talking about the role of taxation that is going to be looking at disproportionately on women as well. We'll be talking about the potentially giving some incentives on for example, working moms from the tax side, for example. So we are looking at some, possibly talking about this, at least in some kind of reports or some kind of policy guidance for the discussions among the finance ministers to see how gender-based taxation is going to be one of the very interesting issues that we can actually raise among these G20 countries.
I see.
Thank you, Dr. Kakaribu. Our last question. So I will wrap up two questions. One from Mark Elder from IGES in Japan, and also Tomi Henderson. So it's to do with G20 priority, especially focused on SDGs. And then we are aware that Indonesia is working very hard on carbon taxation. If you could wrap two elements together and then address these questions.
Yeah, this is not really an easy issue to talk about at G20 forum. Back in Italy, G20 presidency, we together started a working group of sustainable finance, for example, in a finance track. And so far, the discussions have been quite encouraging. The working group itself is actually co-chaired by the US and Chinese. And this is quite encouraging because, these are the among the two biggest emitters in the world. And the way the discussion's been going on is we would like it to be a little bit more advanced, but at least last year in Italy presidency, we achieved something that we call roadmap for sustainable finance at G20 level. And Indonesian presidency is going to continue talking about the implementation of this roadmap. We will take care of at least 2 or 3 topics from the roadmap, looking at how to implement some of the discussions from the roadmap itself on the sustainable financing, especially when you see that in the world, there have been a lot of taxonomies about this sustainable finance. It's not about how to make them converging between one another, but at least how to build interoperability among the taxonomies, among understanding of terminologies and rules and classifications of sustainable finance instruments from country to country. So at least that will bring us together in terms of putting us on the same page as to what to achieve, and based on this common understanding of what the sustainable finance instruments can actually do in terms of leveraging and also boosting the financial market on supporting the sustainability issues. This is not really easy issue to talk about, especially when you talk about a different variety of level of understanding and level of advancement of, not to mention about sustainability financial market itself, just to talk about the financial market depth of one country versus another. So that's already a challenge. And when we start talking about a much more advanced or a little bit more complicated issues, when we talk about sustainable finance, that will involve measuring, reporting, verification, and we start talking about a lot of wide variety of issues on top of the already complicated issues. But I think we are quite encouraged that countries, G20 countries, are willing to talk about this, and I think this is going to be also going hand in hand with the discussions that we've had back in Italy, and also continued at the COP26 discussion about how to mobilize a global financial market, not only the sovereign capital, but also increasingly the private capital into sustainability finance, be it direct into the projects or through sustainability financial instrument.
Thank you, Dr. Febrio Kakaribu. Please also let me introduce his full title, which is Chairman of Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance, Indonesia. So now with this, we would like to conclude open floor question and answer session. Dean Sonobe, if you'd like to say just one remark.
Just thank Dr. Febrio for the, very generously answering all the questions. Thank you very much. And also thank you, Mark Elder, for the good question. Okay, so I'd like to conclude that we have had a great discussion, and we really appreciate the Minister and the Ministry of Finance Indonesia for the very kind, generous cooperation. Thank you very much.